My name is Ed Davis. I'm an attorney with Astigarraga Davis here in Miami. A big portion of my practice is focused on representing governments and government agencies in corruption investigations and corruption civil prosecutions. With me on the panel today is Dan Duguay from Cayman, who is a retired consultant, but immediately prior to becoming a retired consultant was with the Auditor General's office in Cayman. To his right is Andrew Bodnar from Matrix Chambers in London. Andrew and I have worked on several cases together. He is absolutely indefatigable in the courtroom. And then to his right is Rodney Gallagher from Gaffney, Gallagher & Phillips, an investigative firm with offices in Miami, London, and Barbados. And I believe Rodney holds down the Barbados and London pieces of that firm. It's an excellent investigative firm. So today we're going to cover off corruption in the Caribbean, but I wanted to give you some context first before we get into the details, just to give you some comparisons. It's recently been, all of the statistics I'm going to give you have been reported in the last 30 days. Mexico estimates that 9% of its $1 trillion annual GDP is stolen through corruption. The EU estimates that it loses 120 billion euros a year through corruption. The World Bank estimates that Africa loses approximately $180 billion a year through corruption, which is 25% of its total output as a continent. China, since 1990, has had 18,000 managers of state-owned enterprises flee the country after embezzling approximately $120 billion. Just to give you a sense of the magnitude of corruption. What I can't find anywhere out there in the ether sphere is a statistic like that for the Caribbean. There simply hasn't been a study yet that I've been able to find that measures corruption or the impact of corruption in the Caribbean. Now, I think we can all agree, and you'll see by the end of this panel, that that does not mean that there is no corruption in the Caribbean. And I think one of the unique aspects, and my practice and my firm's practice focuses heavily on the Caribbean, is that these are smaller, much more fragile economies. So you don't need the huge numbers to disrupt the business of a smaller country that has very little margin for error with regard to one of its industries being handicapped through corruption. If you look at, for example, the impact of the Stanford case on Antigua, where it was one of the, I think, the second largest employer in the country after the government, and then the secondary impact of the Stanford scandal on international banking in the Caribbean as a whole, and the loss of confidence in international banking in the Caribbean as a result of the Stanford case. The impact is enormous. So while the numbers may not be as big or eye-popping as 180 billion in Africa or 120 billion euros in the UK or the EU, they don't need to be to have the impact in the Caribbean. You don't need to have those large numbers. So I just wanted to walk you through very topically 3 of the major cases that are out there right now in the Caribbean. If I can I have my PowerPoint up? If you'll move to slide 2, please. The next slide. Thank you. Or actually, no, go to the Trinidad and Tobago slide. Just slide 2. One more back. Thank you. One of the current scandals that's being investigated in the Caribbean is Trinidad and Tobago, which is the investigation of Jack Warner, who resigned last month amid allegations of corrupt dealings while serving as Minister of National Security. That came on the heels of him being accused of being involved in cash for votes scandal inside of FIFA and CONCACAF. And that was pretty publicly known at the time he was appointed Minister of National Security in the current government in Trinidad. My firm actually represents the government of Trinidad in the airport, the ongoing Piarco airport investigation and civil litigation, which is still moving forward, and there's still forfeiture cases and civil matters afoot. But the one case that is not on this slide, there's interesting news that broke just yesterday, is the CAICO case. Now, we have to talk about what corruption is. Is it a government minister stealing money or allegedly stealing money? These are allegations. I want to be very clear about that. Or is it commercial bribery, which has an impact on the governments? So if you look at the CAICO case, which many have called the AIG of the Caribbean, the CAICO case has been sort of puttering along. It's really not been prosecuted by the DPP in Trinidad, nor has it been prosecuted civilly by any government agency in Trinidad, to my knowledge. But what do governments in the Caribbean do when they want to make it look like they're doing something, but don't actually do anything? They start a commission of inquiry, which results in nothing usually, but it creates a lot of sound and fury, but ultimately doesn't result in any sort of criminal conviction or civil redress. And just yesterday, it's reported that Lawrence Dupre flew into Trinidad because he was scheduled to testify, and he flew in and then snubbed the commission and did not show up at the commission. So you'll go online and you can look at the headlines in the Trinidad Express and others about that issue. And Lawrence Dupre's, if you will, alleged antics that are being reported in the newspapers. Now, how is that corruption? Well, when CAICO failed, the Trinidadian people had to put $5 billion of their money into CAICO to save it and to preserve the entity, to allow it to go forward and to fill in the hole in the balance sheet. That's where the public corruption comes in. That's where the impact on the public fisc comes in. So that is a huge case of alleged corporate fraud and alleged corporate corruption and bribery and looting, but with a very, very marked impact on a government that and a people that, while they do have some natural resources that allow them to absorb that blow better than, say, it would have been absorbed in Jamaica or other countries that don't have access to the same level of natural resources, it's still a very big blow to the government and to the people of Trinidad. We always lose sight of the fact that the people who are hurt by corruption, the impact of corruption, is not on the fat cats. It's not on they're still going to be living in their mansions. It's on the people at the grassroots level who are bearing the impact of corruption. It's they who don't have the roads to drive on that are being properly built. It's they who don't have access to the hospitals that should have been built. It's they who don't have access to the fire departments and the police departments that are understaffed and poorly equipped. It's they who don't have access to government court systems that are properly funded.